But he takes 1 damage here too.
I feel like there's like a series of
Did he take all 3 of his last hit points from Meteors?
Welcome to Run the Length, an accelerated gameplay commentary series. Before we get into it, I wanted to let you know that I'm hosting a tournament for Marvel Crisis Protocol on October 23rd and 24th at Alarmist Brewing in Chicago. Tickets are $35 and include lunch, link in the description. If you want to support the channel, you can do it for free by liking and subscribing. If you want to go above and beyond, I have a Patreon with behind-the-scenes content and these cool status tokens. This month's condition is Stun. With that out of the way, let's get into the match.
I'm playing Brotherhood with Magneto, Scarlet Witch, Mystique, and Toad, and Gwen. My restricted cards, I brought Field Dressing and All You've Got, because All You've Got is broken, and Field Dressing is like an emergency, oops, something's gone wrong, bail me out moment. And Brotherhood's full of power, so it's fairly easy to play, at least compared to Web Warriors, which is what I'm used to. And then I played Asteroid M to give Magneto or Witch some mobility. And then No More Mutants to just like blow out Pat if I have a chance. Sorry, and then Deception because it's like one of the best parts of playing Mystique. It will either create an insane amount of early pressure on the board, or I will let you just kidnap somebody and kill them.
Today I'm playing Asgard with the 4 good Asgard models, which are Thor, Angela, Valkyrie, and Enchantress, and then Okoye to hit 19 points. My tactics cards are Medpack and Brace for Impact as my 2 restricted cards, and then 2 strong Asgard cards in Odin's Blessing and Rainbow Bridge, and then Bitter Rivals because it's just an overall strong card.
Pat deploys Angela. I deploy Scarlet Witch. Pat deploys Thor. I deploy Toad. Pat deploys Valkyrie. I deploy Gwen. Pat deploys Enchantress. I deploy Magneto. Pat deploys Okoye. I deploy Mystique. We move on to the power phase. I place Magneto's construct in front of Magneto and Witch. Pat activates Angela and walks to the center scenario, then grabs the Legacy Virus. Our extract is Deadly Legacy Virus Cured. There are 3 viruses that you can pick up and are worth 1 victory point in the cleanup phase. If you are already holding a virus, you pay a tax of 1 power for each in order to pick up the next one. At the end of a character's activation, if they are holding a virus, they can remove a condition. If you manage to get all the viruses onto 1 character, they are immediately knocked out and the controlling player scores 8 victory points. Angela moves again to the top of the screen and flips the meteor. Our secure is Deadly Meteors Mutate Citizens. There are 3 meteors in the middle of the board that you can interact with. When you interact, you roll dice equal to your energy defense, and if you roll more successes than the number of nearby enemies, you control it. If you roll a skull, you take 1 damage. Whoever controls the most meteors scores 3 points in the cleanup phase.
So some people, when they activate Angela first to grab a center extract, will walk up and then move back with their second action. And I think that's a good plan when there's like a scenario element you can back up to and stand on as a secure or something. But without that, it felt advantageous to me to force him to play Deception and sort of go from there.
I activate Mystique and move to the top of the screen. She plays Deception on Angela. Angela is moved towards Magneto and Witch. Mystique moves again and picks up the Legacy Virus.
I expected Pat's first turn to be move up, interact, pick up the objective, run away. And he didn't do that. He went for like a much more aggressive flip the side point. And I knew I just wanted to get Angela off the board as quickly as I could because he gave me a model that let me start my objective train rolling that was also holding an objective. So I could just go into it. Deception moves her super far because she's a long mover on a medium base. So I was able to just put her in a spot where both of my big guns could hit her without moving and just let their power economies get rolling really, really hard, really fast.
Thor activates and double moves to the bottom scenario. He picks up the virus and flips the meteor. I activate Witch and attack Angela. Angela takes 5 damage. I rolled a skull, so I trigger Chaos Magic, and I choose to give Angela Incinerate. I walk Witch up, she uses telekinesis to throw the coffee shop at Angela. Angela takes 1 damage and dazes. Angela drops her Legacy Virus. Gwen, Toad, and Magneto receive 1 power from Magneto's leadership. Magneto's leadership, from the ruins, triggers whenever terrain is destroyed. It gives 1 power to a number of characters equal to the size of the destroyed piece of terrain. In this case, the coffee shop was size 3, so I handed 1 power to 3 characters. Witch picks up the virus that Angela dropped. Pat activates Valkyrie. She moves up and charges Mystique. Mystique takes 2 damage. I activate Gwen. She double moves to the bottom of the board. Pat activates Okoye. She walks twice and flips the center meteor. She rolls a skull and takes a damage. Magneto activates and double moves to Okoye. He spends 2 to throw a card at Okoye. Okoye takes 1 damage. I put a power on Toad and Magneto with the leadership. Pat activates Enchantress. She walks again, uses Siren's Call to walk Magneto backwards between Witch and Angela.
Turn 1, my Enchantress activation, she double walks and moves Magneto. And the thinking there is basically that I'm trying to put Magneto in an awkward spot for next turn. So I can't officially stagger him, but I can put him in a spot that hopefully he'll have to move before making an attack next turn, because I know at this point that my first activation has to be Angela. So she's going to go and end up somewhere else, not within 2 of Magneto.
I activate Toad. He walks twice and flips the middle meteor. This ends the turn. Pat scores 4 points, 3 from Meteors and 1 from Legacy Virus, and I score 2 points from Legacy Virus. Score is now 4-2.
So I feel myself falling behind the scenario, but we knew going in that I'm playing attrition, he's playing scenario. He's going to go up to an early lead. I'm going to try to take some of his pieces off the board and grind it back.
Magneto places a construct towards the top of the board behind Toad.
So at the beginning of turn 2, I spent a lot of time thinking about my activation. But it's not so much thinking about which model to activate, it's thinking about how to sequence my actions and where to choose to place Angela, which is something that I tend to not think through enough ahead of time. And she has a lot of choices to make about where she is during the string of things, especially if she dazes a model and is able to use Angelic Assassin, which gives her another movement to consider.
Pat activates Angela. Angela strikes Witch. Gwen uses Lifesaver to pull Witch out of range. Angela gets her action back. Angela uses Blades of Ichor on Witch, dealing 4 damage and triggering Pursuit. Pursuit allows Angela to make a short advance, and she moves back into melee with Witch. Angela strikes Witch again and dazes her. Witch drops her virus. Angela places between Magneto's constructs. Angelic Assassin triggers, and Angela advances, then strikes Toad. Her strike does 2 damage to Toad. Angela places off of Toad. Angela picks up the Legacy Virus. She spends 2 to throw the dumpster at Toad. Toad blocks nothing and dazes. I get to place power from Magneto's leadership. I give it to Gwen and Magneto. I activate Gwen. She uses Spider Technique on Angela. She does no damage. Gwen punches again with 3 extra dice from Spider Technique. No damage again.
Okay, so I ultimately think this activation is probably a mistake, but it's easy to say that when you just like totally biff an activation. My thought here, activating Gwen, is that if I can get 2 more power on Gwen, I can threaten the immediate lifesaver without having to sacrifice essentially anything, and I will put a ton of pressure on this side of the board while also putting some damage on Angela. And if I can stand up Witch, I can just kill Angela. So I try to double tap with Gwen. I think I make a pretty big mistake here where I open with Spider Technique instead of Impact Webbing, whereas Impact Webbing would give me 1 guaranteed power, which means that I could use a throw to later turn on Field Dressing, but instead I just whiff 2 rolls and pass the turn. In retrospect, any activation would have been better than what I actually ended up doing with Gwen.
Pat uses the Asgard leadership on Okoye to remove 1 damage. Prince of Asgard lets 1 character spend 1 power at the start of the turn. If they do, they can remove 1 damage or 1 condition. Pat activates Valkyrie. She uses Warrior of Legend and strikes Mystique. She dazes Mystique. Mystique drops her virus, and Valkyrie picks it up. Valkyrie walks to range 1 of the meteor. I pass. Pat activates Okoye and throws a spear at Magneto. It does 2 damage. She attacks again, dealing 1 damage. Okoye flips the meteor. I activate Magneto. I move Magneto between the 2 constructs. He attacks Enchantress. He spends 2 for Enchanting. Enchanting is Enchantress's defensive superpower that lets her use her Mystic defense against all attacks. You can prevent this by spending 2 power. Enchantress takes 2 damage from Magneto's attack. He pushes Enchantress short towards the center of the board. He throws a card at Enchantress. Enchantress blocks 2 and takes 1. Gwen and Magneto get a power from the leadership. Magneto uses All You've Got. All You've Got lets Magneto take another activation immediately, but he will be dazed at the end of it. Magneto attacks Enchantress. He pays 2 for enchanting. He does no damage, despite re-rolling all his dice. He attacks again, can't pay to get past Enchantress's defense, and does 3 damage. Pat plays Odin's Blessing, reducing the damage to 1. All You've Got dazes Magneto.
This is bad, guys. This is a bad time. All You Got Magneto paying for Enchantress's thing should kill Enchantress. So ideally here, I would want to kill Enchantress. If I don't kill Enchantress, I want to have Magneto on 4 power so that Pat is forced to move it away, or at least I'm threatening to stand Witch back up. The timing here that Pat played Odin's Blessing I think is perfect. It keeps a ton of power off of Magneto. It keeps Enchantress alive, and it prevents me from throwing extra stuff to like get even more damage or move my power around.
Pat activates Enchantress, walks to one of the center objective, and attacks Gwen. She does 1 damage and triggers Sap Power twice, stealing 2 power from Gwen. Enchantress plays Medpack to heal herself 3. She then uses Siren's Call to walk Gwen towards Thor. Enchantress uses the leadership to heal 1 damage. Pat activates Thor. Thor walks to Gwen and punches Gwen. He does no damage. This ends the turn. Pat scores 6 points, all 3 from Meteors and all 3 from Legacy Virus. I score no points. Score is now 10-2.
That's not going great, guys. I'm in a little bit of trouble here. I can't imagine that turn going worse than him scoring every point available to him in 1 turn. I'm glad we didn't pick a super high scoring set of scenarios so that I didn't lose, by 9 points.
I place my Magneto construct in front of Witch.
All right, so going into this turn, Witch is on full power. My plan is to throw a construct and Cruel Twist Angela, and then hopefully have an action left. I put the construct right in front of Witch so that when I get out of the power phase, I'm forced to throw it or take a subpar activation, which will remind me to spend my power in the correct way.
I activate Witch. I throw a construct at Angela. Angela blocks none and takes 3 damage. I place leadership power on Magneto and Witch. Witch attacks with Cruel Twist, but only does 1 damage. Witch attacks with Hexbolt and does 3 damage, KOing Angela. Witch picks up Angela's Legacy Virus. Pat activates Thor. Thor uses For Asgard. Witch plays No More Mutants, canceling For Asgard and preventing him from using it again this turn. It is worth noting here that Thor does not count as using the action that For Asgard normally costs.
So at the beginning of this turn, I'm faced with 2 options for my first activation. I can go with Enchantress and beam a few models, but not be super likely to kill any of them. Or I can go with Thor and try and For Asgard and make some attacks with Scarlet Witch and try and take her off the table for good. I end up choosing to go with Thor and try and take out Scarlet Witch, but I completely forget about No More Mutants and get completely blown out by it. So Thor doesn't get to charge and ends up just making attacks into Gwen instead.
Pat has 2 really good options here. He has like a 3-person beam, which is subpar because it hits Magneto, Witch, and Toad. Toad will slippery out after the first beam, and then he can put him back in if he's still in range. And Witch is in cover. Again, he can spend power to move her. Right? But they're all under Lifesaver. And if I pull somebody out of the beam for Lifesaver, he doesn't get an action back. He just loses that part of the attack. So I'm probably going to rob him of something with Enchantress. So instead he goes with Thor. And for the entire turn, I've been trying not to measure if she's in range of Thor, because the thing protecting Witch is that No More Mutants is online.
Thor strikes Gwen and does no damage. He attacks again, doing 0 damage, but triggers the throw. He throws Ghost Spider towards the bottom of the table near the constructs Witch and Magneto. I activate Magneto and attack Enchantress. I pay 2 power for enchanting. Okoye uses Bodyguard on the attack. She takes 1 damage. Magneto pushes Okoye away. Magneto attacks Enchantress again. Enchantress takes 5 damage. Magneto throws a light post at Enchantress. She takes 1 damage and dazes. I put 1 power on Magneto from the leadership. Mystique and Magneto play Asteroid M. I place Magneto next to Mystique. I throw the bugle at Valkyrie. She takes 3 damage. Power from the leadership goes on Gwen, Witch, and Mystique. Magneto fails to flip the meteor. He takes 1 damage from rolling a skull.
I'm putting Magneto down here because I have to win one of the edge meteors, and I think this is the easier one to win. So I'm using Asteroid M preemptively to get some extra damage there, and it also takes him out of threat of Thor.
Pat uses the Asgard leadership to heal Valkyrie 1. Valkyrie activates. She uses Warrior of Legend and attacks Mystique with a Dragon Fang. She deals 4 damage and triggers the Flurry. The Flurry attack KOs Mystique. Valkyrie throws Magneto into a car, dealing 1 damage. Valkyrie moves to within 2 of Magneto.
So my activation with Valkyrie goes a lot better than I plan. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it causes you to make mistakes when you improvise. And so Valkyrie killed Mystique a lot faster than I realized, or expected to. So she managed to kill her with just 1 action, and I was planning on it taking both. So the rest of her activation, I didn't play very well. She probably should have just made another attack into Magneto and thrown the car into him, or him into the car at least. And instead I just moved, and I ended up really missing the damage that I could have put on Magneto.
I activate Toad and flip the meteor. Toad hops and attacks Thor, doing 1 damage and a wild push. Toad moves to within 2 of the scenario, and he fails to flip, taking 1 damage because he rolled a skull. Pat activates Okoye. Okoye walks to the center meteor and flips the point. She throws a spear at Toad. Toad takes 1 damage. I use Slippery to move towards Pat's side of the board, and I land on top of the bugle. I activate Gwen and move to the center meteor. I flip the center meteor and take a damage. I attack Okoye with Spider Technique. I get no damage, but I get a free advance from Spider Technique. I walk over to the other meteor and use Webline to pull Valkyrie off of the point. Gwen flips the meteor. This ends the turn. Pat scores 2 from Legacy Virus. I score 3 from Meteors and 1 from Legacy Virus. Score is now 12-6. I place my construct between Magneto and Gwen. Enchantress plays Bitter Rivals on Gwen. Bitter Rivals will reduce the attack and defense dice of everyone within 3 of Gwen. Pat activates Valkyrie and charges Magneto.
I'm close to losing Magneto here. I think Magneto should live. I think if he took the attack last turn, Magneto has good odds of dying. But I think Magneto should live through this.
Magneto uses Force Projection to boost his defense. Valkyrie's strike does no damage. She attacks again, and Magneto boosts his defense again. She does no damage. Valkyrie throws the car at Magneto. Magneto takes 2 damage. Gwen and Witch get a power from the leadership.
So my first activation this turn is to play Bitter Rivals and go with Valkyrie and try and kill Magneto. And at the time, I felt like that was the right choice because Magneto was the largest threat left on that side of the board, and I wasn't super concerned about Gwen killing Valkyrie. And ultimately, I think I played that kind of incorrectly because Valkyrie's first attack doesn't do any damage, and at that point, it's quite unlikely for her to do enough damage to actually kill Magneto. So I should have changed my focus to Gwen to try and make power to flip the point, and to put damage and maybe actually be able to daze Gwen.
I activate Witch and shoot a Hexbolt at Enchantress. Okoye bodyguards the attack. Okoye takes 1 damage. Witch shoots Enchantress again. Okoye elects not to bodyguard and does 5 damage, killing Enchantress.
During Scarlet Witch's activation, I was faced with some choices to make about bodyguard, and I sort of made the worst possible combination of them. I think the right one would have been to let Scarlet Witch make the first attack and then bodyguard the second one if we got there. And the choice I made of bodyguarding the first one and then getting lucky and surviving, I should have taken full advantage of that and done everything I could to make sure Enchantress lived.
Pat uses the leadership to heal Okoye. Pat activates Okoye and does a spear blast into Witch. It does no damage. He attacks her again, does no damage again. He flips the center meteor. I activate Toad and walk to the bottom meteor. I flip the meteor and take 1 damage from rolling a skull. This KOs Toad.
Man, I really wish Toad had gotten to take a shot at that middle objective. I don't think it would have mattered that much, but my plan was to walk up and try to flip both points. I did know that 6 dice, he has good odds to roll 1 skull.
Pat passes. I activate Magneto and punch Valkyrie. I do 3 damage. I spend 2 to throw a construct at Valkyrie. She plays Brace. I use the leadership to put 1 power on Magneto and 1 on Gwen. I attack Valkyrie again. I do 1 damage and daze Valkyrie. Magneto picks up her virus. Pat activates Thor and walks to the bottom point, just outside of 4 of Witch. He flips the meteor.
So my Thor activation isn't really doing anything except trying to flip a meteor this turn, but I am trying to keep him in a spot where Scarlet Witch can't just stand there and shoot him for next turn, but I want to keep him close enough that he can for Asgard and be able to hit her, and I find just that little window.
I activate Gwen, I walk to the center, and I pull Okoye off the point. I spend my last power to flip the point, and I fail to flip. I impact webbing Okoye. She blocks 3, I gain a power. I push Okoye away. This ends the turn. Pat scores 3 from Meteors, 1 from Virus. I score 2 from Virus. Final score, 16-8.
So at this point, I felt like I got really lucky with Gwen failing to flip the middle point, because it felt like at this point there was no way I was actually going to be able to win the Meteors on any turn going forward. And because I only had 1 extract at this point, I basically needed 2 to be able to win the game.
I don't know. I made it really close. Like, I put myself in a big hole by making a couple early mistakes. I worked really hard to dig myself out of that hole, but I can't quite bring it home.